On a quiet night, in a warm and peaceful nursery, a 5-month-old baby lay motionless in his tiny crib. That poor little boy, Lucas, had been paralyzed since he was just 3 months old. No movement, no sign of recovery. His parents, Sophia and Ethan, had searched everywhere for a miracle, only to be met with sorrowful shakes of the head from every doctor they saw. They had slowly come to accept the heartbreaking reality that their son might never move again. But tonight, fate had something extraordinary in store, something no one could have predicted. Beside the crib, a small but mysterious figure was awake. Bailey, the young golden retriever with a soul far greater than his small frame. No one could explain it, but Bailey had always shared a special connection with Lucas. Unlike other nights, Bailey wasn't lying quietly beside his tiny human. Instead, he was restless, pacing back and forth, scratching at the door, letting out soft whimpers as if trying to warn them of something. And then, just as Sophia and Ethan turned their eyes toward the crib, their hearts nearly stopped. Because at that very moment, something impossible happened. Lucas's tiny fingers twitched. Was it a coincidence, or was this truly a miracle unfolding before their eyes? And why had Bailey, this little pup, reacted so strangely? This is a real story about love, hope, and a miracle that science simply cannot explain. What really happened in that life-changing moment for this family? Stay with us, because what you're about to witness may just bring tears to your eyes and make you believe in miracles more than ever before. In that small nursery, the soft golden glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls. In the stillness of the room, in a tiny white crib, baby Lucas lay unmoving. No motion, no sign that he could feel the world around him. 3 months ago, Lucas was a happy, healthy baby, his bright smile lighting up the room, his tiny feet kicking off his blanket in pure joy. But then, one morning, his parents noticed something that sent a chill down their spines. His little legs had stopped moving. They rushed to the hospital, desperate for answers, clinging to the hope that there was some explanation, some miracle that could restore their son to the way he was before. But all they received were sorrowful looks from the doctors. We don't know the cause, and there is no cure. When a child stops moving, a parent's entire world comes to a halt. From that day on, Sophia and Ethan, Lucas's parents, lived in an exhausting cycle of worry and heartbreak. Their fragile hope faded a little more with each passing week. Every day, Sophia sat beside the crib, watching her son, silently wishing that one day, just one day, those tiny legs would move again. But that day never came. Ethan, once the strong and steady anchor of their family, could no longer hide his despair. He had tried everything, consulted countless doctors, scoured every piece of medical literature, but in the end, only one truth remained. Lucas might never walk again. The house that was once filled with laughter was now drowning in sorrow. But in that same house, there was still one small soul who refused to give up hope. Bailey was their 3-month-old golden retriever, a gift from Sophia's younger sister. When Bailey first arrived, Ethan had doubted that a puppy could ease the enormous weight of their grief. But then, they noticed something different about him. With his soft golden fur, Bailey was unlike any other puppy. He never barked loudly, never caused mischief like most young dogs. He didn't run around exploring his new home, nor did he demand attention. Instead, from the very first day, he did something unexpected. He walked straight to Lucas's crib, and that's where he stayed. Day after day, Bailey never left Lucas's side, as if he understood that the little boy needed him. One night, Sophia sat quietly beside Lucas's crib. It was past midnight. Ethan had fallen asleep in the chair, exhausted, but she couldn't. She couldn't sleep, not when her son still lay there, unmoving. As always, Bailey was curled up at the foot of the crib. But tonight, he wasn't asleep. He stood up. Slowly, he stepped closer. Then, carefully, he reached up, his tiny paw gently touching Lucas's hand. And at that moment, everything changed. No response. Bailey let out a soft whimper, his deep brown eyes reflecting something beyond sadness. Something stronger. Patience. Determination. He tried again. This time, Bailey nudged Lucas's tiny hand with his nose, then gently licked his delicate fingers, as if he was trying to awaken something inside the little boy. Watching this, Sophia felt a sudden ache in her heart. No one had ever touched Lucas with such tenderness and care. No one except her. Bailey wasn't just a puppy. He was a friend, a guardian, the last flicker of light in this house of sorrow. Unable to hold back, Sophia bent down and wrapped her arms around Bailey, burying her face into his soft golden fur. "Thank you, Bailey. Thank you for staying." Bailey wagged his tail gently, pressing his head against her chest, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay with Lucas, for as long as he needs me." At the time, Sophia thought it was just a sweet coincidence, but what she didn't know was that Bailey had seen something no human could see. And on one quiet night, when all hope seemed lost, Bailey would awaken a miracle no one could have ever imagined. Sophia remembered that morning vividly. The golden sunlight streamed through the window, filling the small room with warmth. It touched the white crib where Lucas lay, as peaceful as ever. Like every morning, she leaned down and greeted him with a soft whisper. "Good morning, my little angel." But today, there was no excited kicking, no happy squeals. Lucas simply lay there, his big eyes open but unresponsive. A sudden chill ran down Sophia's spine. Gently, she reached out and touched his tiny legs. No reaction, no movement. Sophia's heart clenched. "Lucas, what's wrong, sweetheart?" She gently shook his legs, then harder, but he remained still. No kicking, no crying, no sign of feeling at all. Fear crashed over her like a tidal wave. Panic rising in her chest, she bolted out of the room, shouting for Ethan. Minutes later, they were speeding toward the hospital. Ethan's hand gripped hers tightly the entire way, but neither of them dared to voice the growing terror in their hearts. The entire day felt like a living nightmare. Doctors, tests, endless examinations. Lucas lay on a stark white hospital bed, surrounded by cold medical equipment. Sophia sat by his side, tears streaming down her face. She was terrified to hear the answer. Then the door creaked open. A doctor stepped inside, his expression heavy, holding a clipboard with the test results. He looked at the exhausted parents, his gaze somber and apologetic. "We have the results." Sophia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Ethan squeezed her hand, bracing himself. The doctor took a deep breath. "Lucas has a rare form of paralysis. We can't determine the exact cause." At that moment, Sophia felt the world crumble beneath her. She clutched Lucas's tiny hand, her hot tears dripping onto his soft skin. "No, please, tell me there's a cure." The doctor's eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, but there is no known treatment." Sophia collapsed, her body trembling. The strongest man she had ever known, her husband, could no longer hold back the redness in his eyes. How could they accept that their son, their bright, joyful little boy, would never move again? They returned home, but it no longer felt like home. The days that followed were filled with silence. No more laughter, no more hope. Every morning, Sophia sat beside the crib, watching Lucas sleep. She wondered, did he feel anything? Did he know that her heart was breaking a little more each day? Ethan wasn't coping any better. He buried himself in work, trying to escape reality. But every time he came home, his eyes searched for Lucas, and each time, the pain in his heart deepened. They sought out specialists, consulted dozens of doctors, pored over every medical journal they could find. But the answers were always the same. There is no treatment. You have to accept reality. Just focus on making Lucas as comfortable as possible. How could they accept that? How could they accept that Lucas would never know what it felt like to run? That they would never see him take his first steps? The weight of that truth crushed them, suffocating the last remnants of hope. And so, the days of despair passed. But even as Sophia and Ethan's world was swallowed by darkness, there was still one small soul who refused to give up. The 3-month-old puppy never left Lucas's side. When Lucas lay still, Bailey curled up beside the crib. When Lucas cried, Bailey nudged his tiny hand with his nose, and when Sophia and Ethan wept, Bailey rested his head on their laps, his eyes soft and knowing, as if to say, "Don't give up." Sophia had always thought Bailey was just an ordinary puppy, but then she realized Bailey saw something no human could. Ethan, too, began to notice the strange connection between Bailey and Lucas. In the days that followed, Bailey's behavior became even more unusual. Whenever Lucas seemed restless in his sleep, Bailey would immediately get up, whimper softly, and gently lick the baby's tiny hand. If Sophia or Ethan broke down in tears, Bailey would press his head against their laps, his eyes filled with quiet comfort. Most remarkably, no matter how tired he was, Bailey never left Lucas's side at night. He was only 3 months old, but Bailey had a heart full of love and a soul full of patience. Sophia and Ethan started to wonder, is Bailey trying to tell us something? Could it be that Bailey believes Lucas will recover? They had no answers, but one thing was certain, Bailey had never lost hope. Darkness wrapped around the small house. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the silence. The room was so still that Sophia could hear Ethan's steady breathing beside her, but sleep never came for her. Lucas still lay there, motionless, just like every other night. Sophia turned her head, gazing at her little boy sleeping in his crib. His tiny legs hadn't moved in months. 3 long months. Yet every time she saw him like this, her heart still ached as if it were the first day. And then, something strange happened. Bailey, the little 3-month-old puppy, suddenly became restless. Every night, Bailey would curl up at the foot of Lucas's crib, sleeping peacefully like a tiny guardian. But tonight, he wasn't sleeping. Bailey shot up, his small ears standing alert. He paced back and forth, his eyes locked onto Lucas. Then suddenly, Bailey whimpered softly. Sophia jolted awake. She had never seen Bailey act this way before. The little puppy stepped closer to the crib, scratching gently at its wooden frame. One scratch, then another, then a longer, more urgent whine. Ethan stirred, rubbing his eyes. He frowned, glancing down at the restless puppy. "Bailey, what's going on?" But Bailey ignored them. He kept pacing, his small paws tapping anxiously against the floor. Then, suddenly, he turned toward the bedroom door, his round brown eyes filled with urgency. Bailey scratched at the door. Sophia's concern deepened. Bailey had never done this before. He turned back, whimpering, then scratched at Lucas's crib again, as if trying to wake something up, as if he knew something was about to happen. Sophia and Ethan exchanged puzzled looks. He was just a puppy, but why did he seem to sense something they couldn't? Sophia took a cautious step forward. "We should check on Lucas," she whispered. Ethan hesitated, but when he saw the desperate look in Bailey's eyes, he nodded. Slowly, they moved toward the crib. Bailey suddenly went still, his tiny body pressed against the crib's side, waiting, watching, as if he knew something important was about to unfold. Sophia leaned over, her fingers gently resting on Lucas's small frame. He was still asleep. And then, Sophia froze. "Lucas!" Ethan turned to her, alarmed. What's wrong?" Lucas's tiny fingers. They were moving. Both parents held their breath. They didn't blink. They barely dared to believe what they were seeing. Bailey let out a soft, joyful whimper. And then Lucas's hand didn't just twitch, it lifted. Ethan staggered, gripping the crib for support, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Bailey rose onto his hind legs, placing his front paws gently on the crib. He leaned in and licked Lucas's tiny fingers, and then, something even more incredible happened. Lucas's unmoving legs, they trembled, then slowly they shifted. Sophia let out a choked sob, tears spilling freely down her face. This wasn't a dream. This was real. Lucas, the child who had been diagnosed as never being able to move again, had just moved his legs. Bailey's tail wagged furiously. He leapt down, running in excited circles, letting out small, happy whimpers. He had known. He had always known. And tonight, he had witnessed the miracle come to life. Sophia and Ethan clutched each other, their bodies shaking with overwhelmed, disbelieving joy. "Lucas, our baby, you moved." Ethan knelt beside the crib, his hands gently cradling his son's tiny fingers. Bailey sat beside them, watching Lucas in quiet stillness, his deep brown eyes filled with an unshakable peace. He knew, from this night forward, everything would change. He knew Lucas was on his way back, and though they couldn't explain it with science, with medicine, or with any logical reasoning, they knew one thing for certain. Bailey had awakened a miracle the world had deemed impossible, a small heart carrying the weight of boundless love, a 3-month-old puppy who had done what no one else could, a single moment that would change their lives forever. The quiet night wrapped around the small nursery. Beyond the window, the pale moon cast long, silver streaks across the wooden floor. Sophia sat motionless by Lucas's crib, staring at her son. 3 months had passed, yet his little legs remained still, his tiny hands frozen in time. Behind her, Ethan stood, his gaze empty, as if every last piece of hope had been drained from him. But then, Bailey, Lucas's tiny guardian, who had never left his side, the puppy who had watched over him for months, as if waiting for something no one else could see. Tonight, Bailey sensed it, an invisible shift in the air, a flicker of something just beyond human understanding. He stepped forward, cautiously, deliberately. He rose onto his hind legs, placing his soft front paws gently on the crib. His round eyes locked onto Lucas, filled with something unspoken, something certain. Then slowly, Bailey leaned in and pressed his nose against Lucas's tiny hand. In that very moment, a miracle unfolded. Sophia's mouth fell open, her eyes widening in shock as she saw Lucas's tiny fingers twitch. She didn't dare breathe. She didn't dare blink. For the first time in 3 months, a movement. Ethan rushed forward. "Did you see that? Lucas just moved." Sophia couldn't speak. She could only press her hands over her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks, unstoppable. Bailey didn't look surprised, as if he had known this would happen all along. The little pup tilted his head, then gently nudged the crib again. And this time, Lucas's entire hand lifted, then his arm, and then his legs. For the first time in 3 long months, Lucas moved his legs. Bailey leaped to the floor, his tail wagging furiously, his eyes shining with pure joy. His tiny human had come back. Sophia let out a sob, scooping Lucas into her arms. He was still weak, but that didn't matter. This was the miracle she had prayed for every single day. Ethan, the man who had tried so hard to stay strong, could no longer hold back his tears. He dropped to his knees beside the crib, clutching Lucas's small hand, feeling its warmth, feeling the faint but undeniable movements. Their world was no longer filled with despair. Lucas had given them hope again. Bailey sat beside them, resting his small head against Sophia's leg, as if to say, "I knew he would do it." Sophia looked down at Bailey, her heart overflowing with gratitude. This little puppy had never lost faith, even when everyone else had given up hope. Bailey was more than just a dog. He was a friend, a protector, an angel wrapped in fur, carrying a miracle in his tiny heart. And from this night forward, their lives would never be the same. For the first time, after so much pain, they knew Lucas had a chance to walk again. And it all began with a 3-month-old puppy. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden glow over the small crib where Lucas lay. Sophia woke up, her eyes still puffy from a night of overwhelming emotions. But today, she felt something different. She had witnessed the impossible. Lucas had moved his hands. Lucas had moved his legs. And for the first time in 3 months, she felt something she had long lost: hope. Sophia leaned over the crib, gently wrapping her fingers around her son's tiny hand. And then, a moment that made her breath catch in her throat. Lucas's delicate fingers. They weren't still anymore. Slowly, but unmistakably, they curled around hers. Ethan stepped into the room and froze, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him. Their little boy was no longer unresponsive to the world. Bailey, their silent guardian, remained by the crib, watching. He didn't bark. He didn't jump with excitement. He simply sat there, his tail gently swaying, his eyes shining with quiet understanding. Because he had always known. Bailey had always believed this day would arrive. A few days later, Sophia and Ethan brought Lucas back to the hospital for a checkup. The same doctor who once declared Lucas had no chance of recovery now stood speechless, his mouth slightly open as he examined the little boy. He's gripping my hand. The muscles in his legs are starting to respond. This can't be a coincidence. Science? Or something beyond it? They had no answers. But Bailey did. The little pup stood beside them, his tail wagging gently, his bright eyes filled with quiet pride. He had always believed in Lucas. He had never stopped believing. And now, Lucas was proving him right. In the days that followed, Lucas's movements grew more intentional. His tiny hands no longer just curled weakly. They began gripping objects with strength. His legs no longer just twitched. They started reacting to touch. And every time Lucas moved, Bailey was there, watching, waiting, encouraging. Every time Lucas squeezed his fingers or lifted his leg even the tiniest bit, Bailey's tail wagged, his entire body radiating pure happiness, as if nothing else in the world mattered more. He didn't need anyone to tell him that Lucas was getting better. He already knew, because he was the one who had awakened this miracle. For the first time in months, as Sophia and Ethan sat beside the crib, watching their son, they smiled, a real smile. They didn't know what the future would hold. They didn't know if Lucas would ever fully recover. But they knew one thing. They were no longer afraid. Because in this little house, there was a puppy who never gave up. Bailey had believed, even when they had lost hope. Bailey had waited, even when they thought everything was over. And on one quiet night, it was Bailey who awakened what they once thought was impossible. Lucas's journey was just beginning, and Bailey would be there, every step of the way, because sometimes miracles don't come from magic, but from a heart that never stops believing. Bailey never left Lucas's side. When the little boy tried to lift his hand, Bailey gently rested his head in his tiny palm, encouraging him with quiet patience. When Lucas struggled to move his legs, Bailey wagged his tail wildly, his eyes shining with joy. And every time Lucas managed to grip a toy, Bailey jumped up, celebrating as if he had just witnessed the greatest miracle in the world. To the world, Lucas's tiny movements might have seemed insignificant, but to Bailey, they were the greatest victories his little human had ever achieved. And then, for the first time in 3 months, Lucas smiled. Bailey was there. He didn't need anyone to tell him that Lucas was getting better. He had always known. Sophia and Ethan looked at each other, tears streaming down their faces. Bailey wasn't just a dog. He was their guardian. He was hope. He was the miracle they had prayed for through endless nights of despair. Doctors marveled at Lucas's rapid progress. We've never seen a case recover this quickly. It's not just his physical improvements. His spirit has completely transformed. But what they didn't know was what had given Lucas his strength, what had brought his smile back, what had kept him from feeling alone through the darkest, most painful days. Bailey had always been there, soothing every ounce of suffering. Lucas hadn't just healed through medical treatment. He had healed through unconditional love. Sophia and Ethan looked at Bailey, into those deep brown eyes filled with nothing but devotion. And they knew, if it weren't for Bailey, they might have lost everything. Bailey didn't just save Lucas. Bailey saved their entire family. A home once filled with sorrow was now a place of everyday miracles. And every single day, Bailey remained by Lucas's side, watching him move, watching him fight for every small victory, watching him slowly reclaim what they once thought was lost forever. And when Lucas laughed once more, his tiny eyes lighting up as he looked down at his loyal friend, Bailey wagged his tail, jumping up in pure joy, because he knew he had done what he had always believed was possible. He had awakened the miracle within Lucas's heart. Every single day, Bailey would remain by Lucas's side, not just as a dog, but as a friend, a protector, a living miracle. Because sometimes miracles aren't distant magical events. Sometimes they are simply the unwavering love of a heart that never gives up. Lucas has Bailey. Bailey has Lucas. And that is the most beautiful miracle of all. Bailey still curled up beside Lucas's feet, a tiny but steadfast guardian. Lucas was no longer the motionless child from 3 months ago. Every day, he grew stronger, bit by bit. His small hands could now grasp his toys firmly. His legs, once declared hopeless, were beginning to move. But the most important change was in Lucas's eyes. No longer empty, no longer distant, Lucas had found the light again, the light of life, joy, and hope. And all of it was because of Bailey, a 3-month-old puppy who became the miracle of a family. Bailey had given them something no one could have imagined, a miracle born when no one dared to believe anymore, a love so pure it didn't need words, but was strong enough to change destiny, a silent companionship so unwavering it pulled a child back from despair into life. But if you think this is only a story about Bailey and Lucas, think again. In your life, who is your Bailey? Who has silently stood by you, lifting you up when you had no strength left? Who has believed in you, even when you had stopped believing in yourself? Maybe it was a friend, a family member, a stranger who helped you in a moment of despair. Or maybe it was a 4-legged companion, just like Bailey. Take a moment to think about those who have stood by you through the storms. Share your story, because who knows, your story might be the light that someone else desperately needs. Express gratitude to those who have quietly supported you on your journey. Have you ever experienced a miracle in your life? A moment that made you realize the true power of love, of companionship, of never giving up? Share your story, because your miracle might just become someone else's hope. Because sometimes miracles aren't distant or impossible. They are love, they are sacrifice, they are a heart that refuses to stop believing. And perhaps you have been a miracle for someone too.